Welcome to the State of Developer Education, a podcast by Major League Hacking. We explore how technical leaders are creatively tackling the developer education gap to help prepare the next generation of technologists for the real world and build businesses that can adapt to any changes in the technology ecosystem. I'm your host, Jon Gottfried. Welcome back to the State of Developer Education. This month's episode is about artificial intelligence in developer relations. We're going to talk about how developer communities interact with AI, how DevRel practitioners can use AI in their work, and the wider implications of AI on developer platforms and developer experience. I have a fantastic panel with me today, and I will let them introduce themselves. I'm Jon, your host, and really excited for everyone listening. Let's kick this off with some intros.
Hey, I'm Greg Baugues. I served on the developer relations team at Twilio for 9 years, and today basically spent the last year building with and building on AI, and I document that at hihi.ai.
Hi, I'm Ash, and I'm Director of Developer Relations at Nylas, leading our developer documentation and developer advocacy teams. And we empower developers to build on our API platform with email and calendar features.
I am Raymond Camden, a Senior Developer Evangelist for Adobe, focused on our document APIs, our Photoshop APIs, and more APIs coming soon.
Love it. We have a fantastic panel. We'll get more into this as we get into the discussion, but each of the folks on the episode today have written extensively about using AI in their work. We'll include links to that afterwards, but a lot of interesting, diverse approaches here. So I want to start off, before we get into specific projects, with sort of your general philosophy around AI and DevRel. Greg, I know you wrote about this recently. Ash, I know that you've, written kind of some of your strategy around this. When each of you are kind of approaching this, where do you think that DevRel projects actually benefit from AI versus, our traditional human-only approach?
I'll chime in. I feel like my general approach to DevRel projects is 1, build a thing, and 2, then tell stories about the thing that I built. And so I'll just say when I started, so I left Twilio. Sorry for the dog. I left Twilio in February last year. I basically just spent like the last 13, 14 months just playing with this. It was sort of a dual path. 1, I knew I wanted to build on these APIs. But then 2, I sort of had to learn how to code all over again because I started using Copilot and then Cursor and GPT-4 in the coding process. And so if assuming your DevRel projects start with building with code, this has been the most productive year of coding in my life because of all these new tools that have come out. And that's just been fascinating. Like that's been an incredible experience. And then on the telling the story of what you built. And I think Raymond's going to talk about this quite a bit, has written a lot about this. I'll say I've never really had GPT-4 spit out a blog post that was great or that I'd be comfortable putting my name on. But I have ADD, and a lot of times the hardest part of writing content is the blank page problem. And it's actually really useful to start with a bad draft because now I've skipped to the editing phase. And so oftentimes I'll find that once I built the thing, I can copy paste the 60 lines of code or whatever to GPT-4 and then say, hey, write a blog post about this. And by the time I hit publish, I've changed every single word in that post, but it got me past that blank page problem. And that's been so helpful for me over the last year.
I want to come back to that later, but Ash, I'm curious, you set out at the beginning of the year with kind of a strategy around how to approach AI and DevRel. And I know you wrote a recap, but, where do you think it fits in?
Yeah, so the reason I first wrote that strategy on my blog about a year ago was that I felt like initially I was hearing a lot of great ideas from the DevRel team for product features, which is valid. We want that to happen, but I felt like there were things that we could do that immediately impact our jobs and in terms of serving developers better. So first and foremost, it was about, well, let's, use this particular bicycle of the mind better. So, just whatever you're doing, try to have ChatGPT open and see if it helps. That this was a year ago, right? So like it's at that point, it was just sort of like, you got to build the memory muscle that thing is there. From there, then a lot of it was around what Greg was just sharing, which is like, we want to communicate developer use cases today with our product and generative AI, because developers are going to want to know how to do this stuff today. So there's, just take our REST API, sprinkle some AI magic into it, and then like, what do you get? Well, we should be thought leaders in that space, kind of pushing the boundary there. And then the final piece of it was, then let's extrapolate from there with our lessons learned, both in using AI in our day-to-day jobs and in building content around developer use cases, and see what we can do to bake it into the developer experience. And I think that's where we still have a long way to go, but we've spent some time thinking in that space as well.
Yeah. So one of the things you touched on, Greg, is that you like to kind of like build and write in this almost like cycle. And Raymond, I know that like you've done a lot of extensive building with different AI tools, like certainly a lot on Gemini and Google Stack. I saw some on GPT as well. I think you've also written extensively about how you've actually utilized a lot of these tools in your work. One of the angles that I think all of you touched on is using it, generative AI as kind of like a content tool. I've kind of found that to be a little bit hit or miss, but I'm curious, like Raymond, in how extensively you've actually built and written about these projects. Like, where have you found it to fit in, appropriately, and when is the right time for other DevRel folks to actually use that in their content?
Yeah. So about a year or so ago, I became a Patreon of one of my favorite authors. And typically he'll, give you like early draft copies of his work, which is kind of cool. Especially seeing a published author make typos, like I feel better. But amongst like sharing early drafts of his work, he would talk about his writing process, and he was talking about using ChatGPT not to create content at all, but he was struggling with the architecture of a story, of how to bring in a certain element such that it wasn't a shock, that there was proper foreshadowing, all this kind of literary skeletal type work that wasn't creative, it was architectural. And he said it was really helpful in that regard, and it wasn't necessarily telling him anything new. It was all kind of like basic stuff, but it was the mental jog, it was the kind of the prodding to help him better organize. For my blog, like I have this history of, when I learn an API, I try to find the dumbest way to use it, like completely impractical, and I have fun with that. When Gen AI was coming out, or being, jumping to popularity, there were all these like silly examples. They were like, oh, here's this crazy story that ChatGPT made, or here's this weird image. I felt like an opposite pole. Like, okay, if I'm going to write about this, I actually want to do something practical, because I feel like people aren't doing that. So, inspired by that author, and that's John Birmingham, I should say, I looked at the parts of the writing process that I did not like, and that was doing my one-page summary, thinking about the title. And what I have found is that, it's not just hit or miss. It's like almost always miss. But even those misses, like, prod the right part of the brain, because I may not be able to think of something, but if you tell me a wrong thing, I can, oh yeah, you're wrong because it should be this instead. Oh, bam, and type that down.
Yeah, I feel like I've experienced that myself. Like, sometimes I have writer's block, but editing someone else's work is actually much easier to grapple with, and it can often lead to like a spurt of writing that is highly productive. Let's talk a little bit more about that, because I feel like all of us have sort of touched on that idea of maybe not actually like using the content that these tools output, but using it as a way to kind of like spur our own creativity. So what's wrong with the content that these tools are putting out? Like, let's start there. Like, why can't you just use it verbatim?
I'll jump in. Like, the immediate thing I find is that's not my voice. Like, I have a way of talking about something, and when like I ask for title ideas, every single idea is like it was written by somebody else. And even when it's good, it's not my voice.
Yeah, I'd say I think that's a really great point about the voice, and I feel like all of us have probably spent a decade or more cultivating a specific voice to reach a specific audience, and you structure content in a specific way to and it's a honed skill. It's interesting you talk about your author using it and it giving you the wrong answer. I think it's called Cunningham's law, which is the best way to get the right answer on the internet is to give the wrong one. And ChatGPT is really good at giving you the wrong answer. And I don't mean like factually, although it hallucinates too, but in terms of writing, it's just really good at giving you something where I'm like, oh no, I actually don't like how that is said, but I think I can change that into how it's said. Also on the writing side, speaking outside of the DevRel, I have a 9-year-old daughter, and she wants to be an author when she grows up. And we were at the car dealership for like 3 hours a few months ago. She's like, "Hey, can I borrow your phone?" And she loves talking to ChatGPT. She goes, "Can I ask it to write the first chapter of a story?" I'm like, "Sure." And she like giggles when it comes back, and she gave it the character and some ideas. And then she just sat there for 3 hours doing this. And by the time we got out, we went home and we copy and pasted the chat history to a Google Doc. We had 24 pages, 13 chapters of a story. Over the last 4 months, she has edited that. I mean, she calls it editing. She doesn't say writing. She's like, "Can I edit?" She's edited that into a 168-page document with 20,000 words. And again, here, now she's at a point where, probably like 5% of the words in there were originally authored by ChatGPT. But to your point about structuring a story, she's tried writing stories before. And I found that she was always really good at writing chapters, but we had a hard time getting the story to go anywhere. And having it write the initial narrative that she could then hang her own descriptions and her own storytelling off of was really, really powerful for her.
That's super cool. I saw that you had written a post about like making that like kind of an interactive process too. And I think there's certainly one way to interact where it's like, "Hey, generate this thing for me." But the back and forth of it is kind of an interesting piece of this process. Can you talk more about like what that actually looked like? Like, why was that more than just prompts without interaction?
Yeah, look, I wanted to get my daughter to spend time in front of a terminal since she was 3, right? And so I've tried everything. We bought one of those Kanos. I've tried a basic emulator because basics on a TRS-80 is how I learned to code. And nothing's really stuck. But basically, as soon as I got the chat completion Hello World up and running, and I was just running in a Python script with like a while true and then an input, and then it would pass that in as a user message and then put it out. So, and then we could change the colors in the console and stuff. We set a system prompt of, at the time she was writing the story about this girl named Lilith. Lilith wakes up in Fantasyland and she has to like save magic. And so we gave it a system prompt and said, "You are Lilith, and here's the premise of the story. And take the user on an adventure with you." And this kept Emma in front of a terminal. It was far more captivating than any other attempt I ever had, right? And then we could go in and we could start doing things like changing the system prompt or changing the colors. And so it went from, here's a story that she had created to now she's playing this video game as a text adventure that she created, completely personalized content. And this was like 30 lines of Python. It was probably the most magical Hello World experience I've ever had with an API.
That's really cool. I don't know if you know this, but like one of my side projects for going on 20 years now has been a Star Wars themed MUD. And if anyone listening doesn't know what a MUD is, it's like an online multiplayer text-based role-playing game. Kind of a dying breed, but we still have quite a few players. And because it's text-based, it has felt very natural to integrate some of these like generative AI writing tools. And so we've been playing around with like different ways to plug that in. And so like what you're describing reminds me of it, where it's like we've always had non-player characters, right? Like NPCs, but now you can actually like, create a bit of a background and have them be a bit more flexible and interactive rather than scripted. And it feels like a really cool kind of like frontier. Like there's a startup that an old friend of mine in New York, Hillary Mason, is working on right now. That's kind of a similar premise. where it's like, how do you actually use generative AI in gaming and storytelling and making it more of an interactive experience than a scripted experience? And it feels like a really like, I don't know, like novel application of technology that also like fits really well. So I love that like she's actually writing with that in mind. And Hillary's startup is called Hidden Door. I had to look up the reminder there.
I don't want to go too far off tangent, but when you mentioned mud in like gaming history has one of the most interesting concepts where you would reach top level, you would, beat the game and you were expected to add to the game. And I can't imagine like a AAA game being like, oh, you hit end credits. Now you add your own little part to that world. That concept would be amazing with modern technology.
Yeah. So to bring this back around, right, to DevRel, because I think one of the interesting like aspects of developer communities is that a lot of the most prolific and active people in it start contributing back. Um, I'd love to talk a little bit around like how AI is being applied beyond the content portion of DevRel, right? Because obviously that's only a portion of the responsibilities that we all think about here. Um, Ash, I know one of the things that you kind of were playing around with is using AI to like demonstrate use cases to improve the developer experience overall. And I know that Greg, you've kind of played around with that a little bit as well. Like, I'd love to like dig in a little bit there. So beyond content, where did AI actually have an impact in a positive way on a developer's experience, let's say working with Nylas? And where did it not?
Well, I'll say one of the most obvious ones is one that we're still kind of noodling around with, which is a chatbot. We certainly aren't the first to have that idea. I know I've seen a number of examples of it, including last week I was speaking at Austin API Summit, and one of the developer advocates from Plaid was there talking about their chatbot in their docs. We haven't put one on our docs yet, but we have put one in our developer dashboard to kind of give it a little bit more level of protection while we're not quite sure how it will behave. And we've all seen like all the stories about like how it can go wrong for the end user. And I feel like, developers are definitely more likely to push and try to find the edges. I think for me, one of the most painful ways it's gone wrong, not terribly painful, but it just kind of killed me a little, was like a developer asked how to get started with Nylas and Node, and it came up with a use case of Nylas and Node Red. So for anybody that doesn't, it's not Node.js, Node Red is like this sort of like low code, no code sort of drag and drop kind of thing that maybe folks here would know more about than I do. But it was just so incredibly wrong that I just wanted to jump in there and be like, no, like, come back, user. I want to give you the answer. Here it is. There's a page for this. So, we're still trying to figure that one out. I do think at some point we're going to see it in the docs. And then one interesting question here is, how do you surface something like that in the docs? Because you already have search. You're going to put a chatbot in there too. That feels to me like we're kind of handing over some of the decision making on the UX to the user, the developer. And I don't know if that's the right move. Now, a lot of people are doing it, and I don't want to be super critical of that at all. It's very early days, but it does start to wonder. You start to wonder quickly, like, what's the difference between this chatbot and my Algolia search up here or whatever else you might have?
I think one of the things that kind of bugs me about Gen AI, like what to me feels like a bad use, is when I go to Google and search and it begins to generate a response. And I feel like it's taking away from me my opportunity to see a set of links and say, oh, I know that site, it's crap. I know that site, it's good. I'll go here. I was on the Cloudflare docs today, and they have like a top level search, but they also have an AI search, but the AI search is clearly marked like something bot or whatever, had it open earlier. But like you choose like, oh yeah, I want the bot or I want just a generic search. And I like having those two options.
Have you all seen any novel approaches to dealing with the training issue with AI for developer experience? Because like one of the things that seems to come up constantly, maybe in the example you're talking about, Ash, maybe, in what Cloudflare is doing, I don't know, is that the actual like training data set is often out of date with the actual platform and docs. Have you all found any ways to get that to be more current or accurate?
I'll just jump in to say that no, but if someone here knows how to figure that out, let me know, because we just released a new version of our API, and it kills me a little every time I go talk to ChatGPT about something with Nylas and it's showing me V2 of our Node SDK. I'm like, no, you're leading everyone astray.
Have y'all been using Cursor at all?
No, what's that?
So Cursor's a fork of Visual Studio Code. So I used Sublime for like 10 years, and then I very reluctantly switched over to VS Code like last year so I could use Copilot, and then switched to Cursor. Cursor was like a fork of VS Code, but it kind of bills itself as the first AI first code editor. So they have a chat embedded in the IDE. And one of the cool features of Cursor is that you can add documentation to Cursor, and then it will do like internal RAG there, right? So you could go into Cursor and I could drop in the URL for Nylas's docs, and it would consume them. It would scrape all of them, store them internally. And then I can go, when I'm writing code, I can say, write, I want to add an event to my calendar using, and then you would like mention Nylas. And so then it's not pulling from generic GPT-4, it's running retrieval augmented generation on your documentation. So if I were in your shoes, you probably can't control what GPT-4 is doing, but you could start using Cursor, which has gotten really, really popular. And see what is the experience, like how does Cursor consume your docs? Because I have found that some API providers are more easily consumed, or at least you get better results from them. And I'm not sure exactly why that is, but I think you could do some interesting experimentation to see how easily does Cursor consume them, and then how good are the responses that it's giving from there.
That's so interesting. And like one of the things that we're kind of just at the edge at here in a conversation like this is around like, how do I influence the bot to say the thing I want it to say, which is kind of what SEO is. Like, I'm curious, like if that's a direction this kind of stuff ends up going at some point, is like, now we have a whole profession around just trying to get X, Y, and Z bot to say, if someone asks for an email for, API provider, they're going to say Nylas or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've certainly seen mention of that on, different social media networks. Like I've seen people talking about like how to surface their output in a bot. And I've seen a couple of, I think they were like papers or something about malicious ways to take advantage of that. But I haven't seen any like real world use cases that people are actually doing, like bot SEO on like a day-to-day basis yet. But it sounds plausible, right? So to kind of like take this a little bit further, right? Like we're talking about chatbots to help you answer docs questions, or using generative AI to improve search, things like that, where it's kind of the experience once someone lands on your page or they're trying to solve a particular problem. I'd be curious to hear how all of you are thinking about like AI as like part of the developer journey. So rather than like, I know what I want to do and I'm looking for an answer, have we started tackling like, is AI going to generate personalized code samples and ideas for things that we didn't even know someone was looking for? Can it preempt certain conversations that our customer support team is having? Like, is there a kind of a deeper level here beyond like question and answer?
Yes. But I haven't, we haven't really done anything with that entirely just yet, because like, here's the thing, right? So you can kind of imagine a world where the center of the universe becomes the developer, and that they came in to use X API on Y tech stack, and we can recombobulate the doc set to just give you that personalized set with personalized code, but also you start to orchestrate like all of these different surfaces that DevRel often owns and maintains, like forums. Like if I get to the end of a docs page and there happen to be a few forums threads that are relevant to this, I might want to see that, or tech blog posts or YouTube videos that your developer advocates have done. I'd love to see that. And then at the same time, the other side of that coin is, at what point do you allow the user to eject from the bubble that you have put them in with the AI. And so like that's an open-ended question for me today.
I think an interesting thing about change in coding over the last year, for me at least, is I've tried to adopt more of, like, I'd say, coding with AI is, the old paradigm was you hit an error message, you copy, paste into Google, and then scroll, and then find the Stack Overflow, right, or whatever it is. I spend so much more time in the IDE now. And if you think about it, like, the entire internet's constructed to steal your attention, as sort of like the economy. And so I used to get really frustrated because I would get distracted when coding. And I had a friend point out, I was like, you're acting like that's your fault. Like, in order to find answers to your coding problems, you're going out to the web, which is this whole environment constructed to steal your attention off in all these different directions. And the really interesting bit about using Cursor over the last 6 months or so is that I have my GPT-4 chat right there in my IDE. It can give me answers. And so I think that what you're going to find in a challenge of DevRel over the coming years is that you used to be able to control the environment in which a developer was interacting with your educational materials. And I think that the promise of some of these tools is that the AI is going to be meeting developers a lot closer to where they work, as opposed to having to come to your real estate to get the answers.
That's super interesting. Do you think that the role of DevRel will change as a result? Like, what does DevRel in 2030 look like, as a result of generative AI? I'm curious to hear, each of your thoughts if you have them.
I'll share one as kind of back on the content thing. I think generally, like, I do think the barrier to entry to producing text-based content is lower, although I think we all agree that, like, there's still a high quality bar. But it's going to, and I think that people are going to become more and more fatigued with text-based content because there's just going to be so much more of it. And I think that folks are going to be looking for personalized content via chat as opposed to wanting to read blogs. That said, I also think that humans just have a strong desire for human connection. And so I personally have spent a lot of the last year up-leveling my video game because I think on YouTube content, there is a higher barrier to entry. And also, I think people want to make a connection with another human being. And I don't think that's going to go away no matter how good the tools get. I think people are going to look for trusted authorities that want to see faces. And I also just think that post-COVID, there's less of an appetite for travel. When I was at, early days at Twilio, I would fly to Minneapolis to speak to a PHP meetup of 30 people. And that would consume like 2 days, right? Now, why not just sit at home, make a YouTube video on the same topic that could be watched by thousands or tens of thousands of people over the coming months, as opposed to a single event. And so personally, I think one just small tactical shift is moving away from IRL events, moving away from text-based content. And there's going to be a lot more emphasis and a lot more value in producing video content.
Yeah, I'd say that, and Greg, you just touched on the personal connections, that's never going to go away. It may change form, right? So whether your developers are interacting with you in your forums or in an open source context, or even occasionally in real life, whatever it is, like, that's still an incredibly important part of what DevRel does. In addition to that, I think we'll still be doing some of the same types of inputs. Maybe it's not as many blog posts. We've actually decreased the number of blog posts that developer advocates would be creating, kind of partially because of, John, what you were mentioning about fatigue of text-based inputs just a bit ago. At the same time, like, those kind of inputs and surfaces are still important. It's just that they, I think I'm thinking a lot more about them in terms of how they get orchestrated back to the developer in terms of that experience that we offer them. So I'm excited about, some of the more, let's call it, more difficult types of content, right? Like video, for example, but I think there's more we can do. We're also going to be trying to push more into showing developers how to implement at the code level with open source and production apps as well. So there's a lot of fun stuff to do there.
I think for me, like throughout most of my career, like I looked at an API as a solution. Like it does 100% of what I expected to. And only the last couple of years have I been kind of growing to this idea of it's okay if an API or a technical solution helps you. Doesn't have to get you 100% of the way. If it saves you half the time, then that's probably worth a lot of money. If it saves 80% of the time, it's worth a lot of money. So um, I'm seeing more and more, I think, refinement in the future of how these tools work with us. Like I was never worried about losing my job to AI. But I absolutely think my job could be easier and I could do more with it.
That's super interesting. I mean, I definitely see the text fatigue. I think video is a really interesting counterpoint to that. Though, if everyone is doing video, it may dilute itself too. I kind of feel differently about in-person events, though. I agree with you that like it's not feasible to fly out for a 30-person meetup, but I don't think that's necessarily been feasible in a long time.
Not since interest rates went up.
Well, yeah, right, and like many other things, but like I do think that going to conferences, especially, I see more demand for it now than we used to. Like the level of excitement at niche industry conferences feels very, very high right now, either in a post-pandemic reaction or maybe because people just like want to continue doing that kind of interaction in person. And I don't think AI is going to change that, right? Like if anything, it will probably make the experience of being there more valuable because you can actually have these like open-ended creative conversations and hear from people about specific things in a lot of depth. But I don't know, like I don't really think that's going away. And if anything, I'd be curious to see how AI actually like impacts that experience. Like, are people going to start using it to write slide decks? Are they going to use it for, I don't know, some kind of conference interaction? Haven't seen anything yet, but you never know.
As a person who just used AI to help write a slide deck last week, the answer to that first question is yes, for sure.
Did it go well?
It went well enough. I mean, like, look, I don't ever expect the right answer to come out of the bot, right? And I think all of us are sharing a common opinion in that regard. But what I expect is a useful thought partner and something that's like kind of inspiring me to do a bit better or deeper job than what I would have done. And in that regard, it went really well.
You said a thought partner?
Yep.
I like that a lot.
Yeah, I sometimes call it thought partner. I also like the phrase I use a lot about this kind of thing is like someone that I can toss the ball back and forth with. And that's a really hard thing to find sometimes in your day-to-day job, right? People are really busy. People want a solution really quickly. I'm a big believer in sitting in problem spaces and putting space between like, the initial stimulus and the reaction. I think we get better outcomes when we do that. And I still want that from humans and prize that. But I think the bot really helps me in my initial sort of the dumber phases of exploring a problem space to just toss the ball back and forth with a thought partner that doesn't get annoyed
and doesn't judge you, right? Like there's truly no dumb questions. Like it's not, you don't have to be worried it's going to think you're an idiot. It's going to be infinitely patient. It's going to be non-judgmental.
I see a lot of students using it for that reason because they're scared to ask their professor and get like, have the professor think they're not, following the content. But they could easily ask ChatGPT the same thing and get perhaps, an equivalent or better answer in some cases. So I want to kind of like pivot the conversation a little bit because we spent a lot of time talking about how AI can like, enable different like parts of the DevRel job, like content or, docs or things like that. I feel like all of you are also having a lot of fun with AI. And like when I look at generative AI as a space right now, like, yeah, like there's definitely some businessy applications, but like there's equally as many fun, perhaps silly, like thought experiment applications. And, Raymond, like when I was reading your blog and like I dug into this quite a bit when we were preparing, like there's so many just like cool projects. And I'm sure there's like some tie back to your work in a lot of ways, but a lot of it also just seemed explorative and fun and creative and interesting. And for me, that's always kind of been this differentiating factor of DevRel work is that like part of what gets developers excited about a platform is like creative, fun exploration. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, right? Like when you start using AI to, for example, like detect cat breeds, right? Or to be a dungeon master, uh, what does that actually unlock for you? Like, why go down that road at all? And how do people react?
So I mentioned earlier that I tend to lean into the silly, and part because it makes it fun for me. Like I love to write code. I have for a very long time, and I love building and practical things. My hope is that my readers see that, okay, Ray did this really dumb thing, but I can map that to like an actual productive type thing, and I see how easy the code is and what Ray built. I could do something practical with it, and I, won't be as scared now that Ray has introduced it to me. And it's weird talking about myself like that. Somebody else, please talk.
I'll concur with that sentiment, though, as someone who just recently used some of your blog content around 11D. You came up in search results, and it was absolutely true. I was wading into 11D from the deep end, and so I totally agree with that. Yeah, I think just introducing some of that level of fun, in the content, where also like this is just something that developers feel like they should be learning about right now. And the reality is like, let's say last week, right? The title of my talk was like AI for mere mortal web developers, because like I think part of just the outset is like you might be a mere mortal developer if, like me, you aren't an AI scientist, or if, like me, you prefer to learn by doing as opposed to reading a bunch of papers up front. And so, like, just someone's got to give people the idea that, like, hey, actually, it's give you kind of create that permission environment, if you will, to be like, oh yeah, I don't know everything about this, and actually that's okay. We're gonna build something fun anyways and see how it goes. We'll get better at it over time.
Lex Friedman just posted an interview with Dana White, the president of the UFC. And Dana White had this line in there. He said, "My competition is anything else you might be doing on a Saturday night." Right. And so he's not thinking like, my competition's not the other fights, whatever. It's like, how are you going to spend your time? DevRel encompasses a lot. So some DevRel is docs, right? And so if I'm on the docs, if I'm on your docs, I'm probably already kind of committed to your thing, and maybe I don't need cute stories and whatnot. But a lot of my time at Twilio was spent on the evangelism team, where our metrics are around signups and awareness, brand awareness, and brand affinity. And so if you're producing that type of content, your competition is anything else that a developer might be consuming on the internet. Right. And so your competition is TikTok. Your competition is, woodworking videos on YouTube. Right. And so there, like, human beings like stories, and human beings like being entertained, and you do want to educate, but you often need to entertain first to grab the attention. And so in that case, having, a fun aspect to your projects makes for better stories. It makes for better to draw folks in, to get them to have the first time user experience, to get them to sign up. And then, see if the thing works. And then you can push them off to the docs we'll just give them the answers they're looking for. But I do think, like, just telling the fun stories also is just more fun to build. Like, it's just the best way to learn, right? Like, there's enough boring stuff at work. And I think so many of us got into development because it was fun, and because it was instant gratification, because we like building things. And I think just having that empathy for developers too, to have that come through in the content, is just a great way to build relationships and get folks to use your thing and to get your stories to spread.
What is the right balance of mashups with your company's platform versus projects that are purely creative and fun and may have nothing to do with the actual products that your employer publishes?
Is there a right answer to this question? I mean, like, the interesting part of it right now is like, in terms of my role at Nylas, like, I report to our SVP of product, and interestingly enough, his point of view is like, y'all don't really need to be building things that have anything to do with Nylas. Build fun things, whatever that is, just go build. And I find myself bizarrely on the other side of that as the DevRel lead, where I'm like, I wonder if we shouldn't have at least some sort of integration with Nylas involved in these projects. And so we're still kind of calibrating that, to be honest. But I think for our team, the idea that we're just going to build some stuff because it's fun and like, let's go get it, developers excited, and then we'll use the Nylas platform, the blog or the social media or whatever to get that word out there too. It's kind of new for the DevRel team, but you may see us doing some of that this year, actually.
Raymond, I've seen you doing both. I'm curious where you find that balance.
So to me, it's kind of easy. Like if I think of a cool idea what their API is, then I'll go on our dev blog. So I just do it. I do have to not censor myself. I scale back a little bit, the kind of crazy cat related type stuff, but I still sneak it in. In fact, I can't say that. We have something coming in the future where I was able to sneak in some cat pictures and like official docs. I was shocked. But because I have two outlets, I have a place to put the work, more serious stuff, but I have my own personal blog. So if you are listening to this and you're new and you only have like your corporate blog, there's blogging platforms out there where you can express yourself and go crazy. And I absolutely recommend doing that.
Yeah. It's an interesting like tension, I think, in DevRel right now, where certainly some people view like the personal brand of their DevRel team as an asset to the company. And I think it is. And then also the things that they produce for the company firsthand also become part of that. And like, I think probably for you, like, you've been blogging for many, many years, Raymond, unrelated to your work. But I do think that there's definitely like a push and pull right now of, should I be doing this as a corporate project? Should I be doing this for fun? And how do I find, the right sort of like balance of those different things, given the environment right now, which is very ROI focused?
Jon, I think the answer to your question about it depends a lot on the life cycle of the company and also the numbers you're trying to move at that time and the time frame you're trying to get your ROI. Broadly speaking, on let's just say the Twilio blog, we'd have two different types of content. That we'd have the post that we'd write for the purpose of getting organic traffic in the long run. So it's like environment variables in Ruby, right? And we'd know that there wasn't a really great post out there. There's a hole in the content ecosystem for this. You could spend a lot of time writing a really good solution to that. And the day you press publish, you'd get 0 visits to it. But over time, the chart would go like this, right? And that would drive awareness. And then it'd get the cookie, and then we could do retargeting and whatnot. We'd also write a lot of posts that were like how to send a text message in Python, how to send a text message in Ruby, how to make a phone call. So those are going to get less traffic, but they're going to convert more. Then you had posts that you want to have blow up on social. So like the one I wrote, the best story here was like how I taught my dog to text me selfies, right? So it's like the dog pressed a button on the Arduino, it took a picture with the webcam, it used Twilio MMS to send a text, right? So that hit Hacker News. The traffic for that was like, boom, 50,000 visits, and then nothing, right? Nobody ever Googles how to text my dog to send how to teach my dog to send selfies. Like Twilio made $0 in revenue off of that use case, right? But I tend to think of it as there's content that a developer consumes when they have an IDE open and they're trying to solve a problem. And then there's content that they consume on the toilet, right? And the dog selfie thing is 100% like that's on the toilet, but hopefully it plants the seed in the back of their head that if they need to send text messages in the future, they're going to do that. And I think at different phases in a company's life cycle, there's need for awareness versus need for signups versus need for organic traffic, and because the SEO juice rises all the posts on the blog. And it's just like, what lever do you need to pull to move different numbers at different phases in the company?
Yeah, that's a great summary of sort of how to think about that. We only have a few minutes left here, so I want to close with some kind of like broader thoughts. So there's a lot of hype around AI. It's also really freaking cool, right? Like the barrier to entry to working with these types of tools is lower than ever. How do each of you kind of like parse where we're at in the hype cycle versus the reality of how this has like an impact on the world and perhaps the businesses that you're associated with. And you don't have to speak on behalf of the businesses, but existentially, how do you think about that?
I'll go first because I'll be wrong. I'm always wrong at predictions, so I'll get out of the way. It feels like we are at the scary stage where a crap ton of money is being put in, and there's going to be a crap ton of losses. But I kind of want to get that over with so we can get past it. I worry that we're kind of there, but I absolutely see value in this. So I think it's kind of like a necessary pain we'll have to go through to kind of get to the, this is less the new superhero, and this is a tool I use every single day, and it's just normal now.
I sort of feel like the folks who are saying, hey, this is like the next phase of crypto, like haven't actually used the tools. And then the folks who are saying this is going to eliminate all of the jobs also haven't actually used the tool. Like, like there's absolutely utility here. And also it's not that great, right? Like, and I think so much of the game right now, and what's so exciting is all greenfield, is we're all trying to figure out for what problems is this actually the right tool for the job? And we're all sort of collectively discovering that right now. The place where I look for a lot of inspiration is the world of chess. Like Kasparov in 97 loses to Deep Blue, and then AI really takes over there. And he makes the point, he's got this great TED talk, and then he's got his book Deep Thinking that he published in 2017. And he says, look, like the human chess players today are the best human chess players who ever lived because they've been training alongside superpowered AIs for their entire lives. Right. And so I think a lot of the really great use cases are in the like augmentation, like working alongside AI, not in the automation. And generally I found, and we were talking about this with, customer support bots, right? Like generally the places where you're trying to automate away the work are underperforming. And generally the places where you have a very skilled person, or even not a skilled, even a 9-year-old, right? Like who's trying to do something alongside an AI are finding that they're able to do that thing better, faster, and cheaper. And those are the use cases that are a lot more exciting to me right now.
I'll join Raymond in being boldly wrong about some things, but like for me personally, I see the sort of race for primacy as one of the 2 or 3 like major AI model creators out there is like, that's a thing that is happening. That is not the game I am playing as a DevRel. What I'm trying to do is help developers make sense of all of this because they've got to use something like that in their applications. And whether one company wins out or another probably doesn't really change the outcomes. Developers still need to figure this stuff out. What do they need to figure out? Well, they need to figure out how to prompt the thing, which is hard. They need to figure out how to get some kind of response back that preferably they don't have to surface as just like a stream of strings going back into their UI. That's a fine use case for chatbots and stuff. But I think like, how do I get like reliable outputs from these things that I can then make logic-based decisions on? I think there's some tooling out there for that, but I think there's still a lot more to do. Also, how do I pick the right model in the first place? You can go out to Hugging Face today and there's like gajillion models. By the way, Ollama, one of my favorites because you can run it locally. The demo I did on stage at the API Summit in Austin the other day, I was running Ollama 2 on an M2 MacBook Air. If you ever want to do like a tension-filled tech demo, do that. We got to wait for a little bit, but it worked. And so like, I think one of the questions a lot of developers and companies will have to ask themselves is like, if I'm putting AI into my product, who's AI? Like it's less about like, am I going straight to OpenAI or whatever, but am I doing this via AWS or Azure, or is it worth it to try to make it local to my application? And if so, like, how much is that going to cost? How do I figure out how that thing scales? So like, I think a lot of those kind of questions are less about like, how good is the model, and a lot more about like, as a, again, mere mortal app developer, how am I taking advantage of this? And so I think we'll see a lot more thought in that space. And I'd love to see some things over the next year that help developers, one, leverage data better, like bring data to the model better, and then also, just kind of reliably make logic-based decisions on the output from the model.
Yeah. Those are all fantastic predictions. I want to close with one more round robin question here. And Greg, I know you were shouting out Cursor quite a bit earlier, but I'd love to hear from each of you, like, what AI product, tool, startup, whatever, are you most excited about right now that you think people may not have heard of yet? Like, what's your sort of like up and coming exciting AI tool? And feel free if you need to Google the name of it, which I see Ash doing, you know.
I'll say Prompt Layer. Great New York startup. Actually, Jon, they probably exist because of you and your work from the hackathon. They went to, was it the BCA, the world's largest high school hackathon? And those guys are, so it's a really, the easiest way to put it is a CMS for your prompts, right? So you think about, you probably start off by hard coding your prompts in your source code. And their thing is, hey, much in the same way that you no longer hard code the pros in your website, let's create a CMS where we can extract the prompts, and then we can have version control. And then we can also have evals, so we can test and score the responses to see how are our prompts performing against, let's just say, unit tests. Also, if we extract them out of the source code, now you don't need to know how to code to edit and iterate on the prompts, right? And so they actually, I think I have here this hat that they gave me. This says prompt engineer on it. Like, these guys are making this bet that there will be a world where there exists prompt engineers as a legitimate job, and you are going to be able to do that much in the way that there are Salesforce admins who don't know how to code but are highly technical and know the ins and outs, and not just, also like the SEO, where they not just can write better prompts, but they know how to build the system to say that this prompt is objectively better and cheaper and whatnot. And they're building the tooling for that. And I think it's really, really needed. And it's been a really, really fun playing with that. It's an interesting paradigm to think about how this evolves over the next 5 or 10 years.
That's awesome. Yeah, Jared, one of the founders, was briefly an intern at MLH like 9 years ago or something. When he was, yeah, he's a really smart guy. But yeah, Prompt Layer is awesome. Ash, what do you got?
Yeah, so for me, it's something that I heard about at our local neighborhood tech meetup, which we co-organized. And so like that, someone was one of the iOS developers who's currently working on some Vision Pro stuff, was talking about this the other day. I haven't tried it yet, but I'm interested. And it's called Devin AI. It's Devin as in the name, DEVIN AI.ai. So it's a... I don't know, like, it looks like their Hello World is an NSFW character creator or something. So I don't know how sort of, that's weird. But like the idea is, like, from my understanding anyways, is it's something that just, like, probably closer to what Greg was describing earlier. It's just something that can, like, look at your entire code base and code along with you in a way that I haven't seen a lot of tools excel at. I definitely haven't gotten the best results out of Copilot. I tend to eject from that pretty quickly. I assume that'll get better quickly, but it sounds like Devin AI is trying to go a step beyond that. So that's a thing I haven't tried that I want to try very soon. And then my one ask for the universe is like I still haven't seen any AI that like generates reliably useful UI. Like V0 is pretty cool, but it's also like it's going to get you started like in a very sort of like this was made by V0 kind of way. But if you want to kind of go beyond that, it's up to your own skills. I'm not a front end dev. I'm trying to build some UI right now, so I'm just saying, like, someone built that would be amazing.
I have not used Devin, but I do know it blew up the Twitterverse, like, or the X-verse, whatever we call it now, a couple of weeks ago by saying that they were the first AI software engineer, which was quite a hot take. Raymond, I'd love to hear your call out here to finish this up.
Yeah, it's not really new, but I think it's still in beta. But the Algolia support for AI and their search, I've had access to it, but not the time, and I'm very excited about it because I have a good corpus of blog posts. You know, like all my blog posts are in Algolia for search. I'm really curious to see how well their AI works against like my content and how focused it is and how helpful it could be to find things. I've been a big fan of their APIs in general, so I'm hoping that this is also well done.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. This was honestly a really interesting and enjoyable conversation. I hope folks enjoyed listening to. We'll include links to the different resources and projects that folks mentioned throughout the episode here, and definitely subscribe for more. We're publishing once a month right now, but a lot more exciting conversations to come. So thank you all, Greg, Ash, Raymond, and happy hacking.
Thank you all very much.
The State of Developer Education is brought to you by Major League Hacking. To find out more about Major League Hacking and how we're educating the next generation of developers and helping the world's leading companies reach them, visit sponsor.mlh.io. And make sure to search for Developer Education in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else you listen, and click like and subscribe so that you don't miss any future episodes. And if you like it, please don't forget to leave a review, and we'll give you a shout out on a future podcast. On behalf of the team here at Major League Hacking, thanks for listening and helping us empower the next generation of technologists. Happy hacking!